introduce you to a young woman, 24-year-old woman named Ibi Caputo. She was admitted into the hospital with acute leukemia. We're going back to 2017. Acute leukemia is, as the name suggests, it is very serious. For some reason, we've been seeing an increase in cancers among people in their 20s and 30s. And there's some buzz in the medical community about why that is happening. She was one of those. She had come into the hospital for some minor cuts that were not clotting. And they did the blood test and found that she had this acute form of leukemia and told her without treatment she would die in 2 weeks. So talk about a timely process there. So she basically, she never left the medical complex. She was in the hospital for 6 months from there. She's fine today. So just so you know, I'll give you the outcome now. She's been cancer-free since 2008. So we became actually quite good friends, despite the fact that I was her chaplain back during that period. She was a journalist. We ended up writing an article together on just her journey as a cancer patient and a diehard Buddhist practitioner. But there was one point, and also a very incredibly resilient and positive young woman who, her concern while she was in the hospital, going through bone marrow transplant and all of the rigors that go with full body radiation and such. All she ever did was think about the woman in the room next to her who would cry out all night long. And I came in to visit her one day and she said, I want to do something to help her. I don't know what to do. I feel like I can sit here and pray for her and everything, and I do, but I feel like I need to do more to help her. That's a young woman who was given a terminal diagnosis without treatment and was now going through the rigors of it. Extraordinary. One day she called me and said, I need to see you. I'm done. I'm just done. And so I said, okay, I booked a consult space in the hospital and met with her there. And this bright, so very positive, resilient, strong young woman was utterly defeated. Her body had been beaten up by chemotherapy and, body, we have this term nama-rupa, which somebody mentioned earlier, or mentioned the mind-body thing. And nama-rupa, name form, which is technically, from a practical standpoint, mind-body, which we've had this term apparently for many thousands of years now. So, sure, she was definitely in the throes of giving up and depressed. She came in and began sobbing and sat down and said, Chris, what do you tell somebody like me? Now, I always have something to say about everything. Unfortunately, that's one thing that I need to work with. I was utterly silent. Anything I would have said to break the silence would have been in some way a violation of her question, where her heart was. My response could only be silence. And what I felt in that silence was helplessness. That was my response. That was my feeling response to her. Well, of course, she was feeling helpless. She was feeling so many different layers of grief and despair. And she came to me for help, and I had nothing to say. So the only thing I could do in that moment was to do what we're going to talk about now. It was more important for me to just sit with her in that fog of grief and helplessness. There was no problem solving this. There was no sort of pith instruction, flash instruction, or, anything would feel placating. You can't, right, in that moment. So I began breathing in what I was feeling in the room. So if you recall, I think yesterday I was talking about Tonglen, and by now I had adopted it as a very important practice to take on the suffering, take in the suffering of others, and breathe out, exchange it basically with compassion. And so I began doing that. I just thought, you know what, we're both feeling helpless. So breathing in deeply, I could feel all of that density, that heaviness coming in. And interestingly, inspiring what was below the helplessness. Just what in Buddhism we call basic goodness. The sense that there is this underlying quality that is not suffering. And the sense that love, the heart, is the response. It's the place maybe where we feel pain, and it is the response. It's the place from which we respond. So I sat there, I was breathing in just her grief, my own helplessness, my need to be beneficial, my need to fix something, to take it away from her, all of these things. And there was this confluence of things. Some of it was hers, some of it was mine, We're in a place where there is a lot of suffering. And then exchanging that, almost like a plant metabolizing oxygen into carbon dioxide. Or what is it that they do? They take in pollution and then put out oxygen, is that right? We have any botany specialists? Anyway, it's in a way, it's similar in a very rudimentary way to that. Taking it in so you can give something back that's beneficial. The tendency to problem solve, that can really get in the way when what we really need to do is show up fully with an open heart and assiduously with fierce compassion, loyal compassion, to be present despite what we're encountering. And yet, what if we don't know how to bear our own suffering? How do you think it might be to hold someone else's? It's still laden with some agenda, perhaps. Right? In this practice called Tonglen, or sending and receiving, which is what I just described for you, there can be a tendency for some teachers to begin with the advanced form of the practice. Certainly, initially, I learned from somebody who taught the advanced form, which is just taking in the suffering from the world and then replacing it. Well, we have to be able to hold our own suffering first. To train, it's part of the training so that we work up to a place where it is authentic, deep, and profound. Otherwise, there's always going to be some ambivalence to the practice, some resistance perhaps to taking in too much suffering, perhaps a barrier, a sense of avoidance. So the Atisha, the person who he was a Bengali monk who brought the teachings of Tonglen to Tibet. And along the way, he had heard that the Tibetan people actually had very little suffering. So you know how news travels, the telephone game, by the time it gets to that person, it's a whole different message. So he brought along his attendant, who was a cranky, irascible, irritated constantly, this person. He intentionally brought him along to practice along the way. Now, I don't know how long it takes to go from Bangladesh to Tibet. I can imagine on foot, that was a long journey to be with someone like this. And then he got there and realized, oh, people are suffering here too. I guess that wasn't necessary. The divine play. Atisha, and then Geshe Chekawa Yeshe Dorji, who wrote the commentaries on Lojong on mind training. who really break down in the 7-point mind training in Tibetan Buddhism that first you must begin with yourself. And this is there in the text. It's something that's often missed by teachers, and yet it's important. In fact, Shantideva, the great Indian sage who wrote the Way of the Bodhisattva, the Way of the Bodhisattva, Bodhicharyavatara, talks of in that text, and mind you, this was a couple of hundred years earlier, that we must guard the woundedness of the mind. I don't know about you, but to me, the woundedness of the mind sounds like trauma, right? We didn't invent trauma when someone thought of the word, obviously. There was clearly, mindfulness is there to guard our introspection against the woundedness of our own mind. So here is a precedence that is also followed up with the teaching on taking on the sufferings of others. So taking difficulties onto the path is, first we have to be able to work with our own difficulties and train that way, as I mentioned. So the way that I've started teaching this practice is in 4 stages. And we're not going to do all 4 stages because that would take quite a while. We'll do sort of a variation of it, but sending and receiving. Tong is sending, Len is receiving, the Tibetan. And interestingly, we begin with the exhale. We begin by starting with sending forth the luminous, spacious, loving, caring compassion out into the world. If we're practicing for ourselves, we're extending it throughout our inner space and our bodies and such. So we're training with that. And then on the inhale, we're breathing in the suffering that we're encountering. Now, why would we want to do that? And part of it is by beginning with our own suffering. We're not breathing in something that's not already there, but we are allowing what's there to have its own existence. Right? We're allowing it to abide within our space as opposed to just trying to shove it away in some corner. Out of sight is not out of mind, by the way. Right? So we're allowing something to arise so that we can bring love to those qualities. This is part of the self-compassion and how we train to hold our own suffering. The second stage, then, is to think of a loved one, someone really close to you, who you know is really having a hard time, is struggling or is suffering. And then breathing in their challenge, their suffering on their behalf, and sending back to them this spacious, open quality of your deepest love. Now, what happens there, so having experimented extensively with this and also on retreat, is if it's someone I care about, I'm going to have a feeling about it. Oh, my sister is going through this. I'm going to practice Tonglen for her. But now my own feelings are arising about her dilemma, right? You see how complicated it can get. And so then it's just having the presence of mind to come back and then breathe in my own feeling. So it's a very fluid practice to where we can work with basically whomever or whatever the source is of the suffering and see, oh, this is how I'm feeling. So for example, my ex-wife who had Lyme disease and went through that whole thing. Of course, I had a feeling about it. I had to practice to metabolize all of that to free it up, to free it and relinquish it. So we can kind of move in between. And actually, I encourage people who practice this to really make it a very natural process. Not put so much effort and striving and have to get it right. This is true for all of our meditation practices. Yeah, we need discipline, focus, virya, but we also want to be flexible and at ease with the practice. So allowing it to be natural. Then what we can do, and I do this also in some of my classes, I think a couple of you have probably been through this with me, is then widening the circle of compassion and practicing with a particular population or a group. So when there was that horrible earthquake in Haiti, my community, we jumped on our Sunday night call and we began practicing Tonglen as a group for the people in Haiti. And it's just such a dismal situation there, even now, with the government falling apart and but we can practice with a very specific population. We can practice for the earth. We did this recently on Earth Day. We did Tonglen for the environment, for the world. It's powerful to do in a group with a particular people. And then ultimately we've trained enough to be able to authentically, deeply, and profoundly practice this for all living beings. So you see, if you're ever in that situation where someone is teaching you this practice and you're like, wow, this is, first of all, it doesn't feel comfortable or safe because, I'm taking in way too much and we all are already carrying so much. But to train to it, we're also training ourselves to cultivate this heart that's really quite spacious already. So it's really a process of capacity, building a capacity to show up in this way. It's already there. Right? The other thing I'll say before we practice it is the part of compassion I find interesting. So we have aspiration, we want to be compassionate people. We devote ourselves to showing up this way. And then there is response, right? There is the action taken, but there's something else in between. Intimacy. And here we're talking, we're not talking about romantic intimacy. We're talking about being close to, being willing to lean in and be close to someone who is suffering, or to lean into our own suffering, as opposed to being afraid of it or rejecting it. This is the connection piece of compassion. The intimacy, the closeness, the willingness to take the strong back and soft front and then lean into it, be present with it in a way that is stable and open and even transparent. I've talked to a couple of you about the caregiving work you do. It's like, well, how do I not take on all of this burden? And there are different ways to do this. And another way is to become transparent, bringing the transparency of awareness so that it moves through us. It doesn't get in and then, boom, take up residence. After all, if it doesn't belong to us, why are we holding on to it? It's better to transmute it and let go. So this is kind of how I approach this practice. There is a word called upatana, or upasthana, I think, in the Sanskrit. And I believe it means presence of mind. Actually, Swami Chidakananda was in my extension school course, and we just happened to be talking about Vedanta that night. And I think we'd had this conversation about the meaning of that term. Do you remember? Okay, not to put you on the spot. That's all right. Yeah, don't worry about it. So presence of mind, this very natural quality of awakening that is already there. Part of this too is to practice this kind of intimacy within compassion, getting close to, can be a little fraught for a lot of us. Because, if you start looking into like John Bowlby's theories of attachment and a lot of the literature on how perhaps we were raised and conditioned, getting close to people can be complicated, right? And so to also be reminded that this is we talked about process earlier today. It is a process because of what we are carrying. And so we want to practice gently and without judgment, without self-judgment about it, without criticism or a sense of can-do. And yes, you go to Harvard, you talk about overachievers. You try to teach them some of these things. Like, yeah, I'm gonna really master this practice and get an A++ on it. And yet I don't want to feel anything. Well, that's a dilemma. So anyway, it's natural to just sort of feel different things about this practice. So what we're going to do is just sort of enter in a bit. And I'd like to invite you to just take a moment and consider anything that you're feeling right now that is manageable, that is of the nature of discomfort. Maybe there's a feeling that you have, something just to practice with. Let's not use something that is so large that now we're, having a breakdown here. If it happens, that's okay, but let's not make it happen. Let it arise on its own. So, the last thing I'll say about this practice is that it really is about opening, not just to our own suffering, but whatever we are carrying, others too are feeling this. That's the piece here. This is an important part of it, because whatever I'm feeling, it may not even be personal. Others too feel this very feeling. So many have felt this throughout the history of humanity. So many will feel this feeling. I'm part of this community of people feeling this very feeling. And that reminder hopefully can inspire a response of compassion. So full-heartedness, not just for myself, but for all who feel this. And it's okay to also work simply with suffering. If you want to just, or discontent, which is really what dukkha means, discontentedness, dissatisfactoriness of this life. So if that's a feeling, that's fine. It can be anything you want, but pick something that is workable for you. Okay? How much time do we have? 10, perfect. That happened last time. Yes. Okay, welcome back to meditation. And as always, we're just beginning with the experience of your breath, of your body, as a place to begin to enter in. We're going to do just a minute of diaphragmatic breathing. And if you've never done this before, it's just simply breathing into the chest, and allowing the breath to be full around also in the back. And then gently on that inhale, feel your solar plexus. Just gently with your breath, press a little bit down on that diaphragmatic muscle, and then release and breathe out. If you want, you can also place your hand over that if it helps. But what we're doing is loosening up a bandha or a lock that holds so much here. So breathing in through the nose, taking it into the chest and around the back, the shoulder blades. And now using that breath to gently just ease it down to soften the diaphragm muscle. If there's a quivering here, that's natural because we hold things here. So we're just loosening something up that might have been stuck here. And then breathing out. So we'll just do this a few times. No forcing, just allow it to be easeful and natural, but full. If you find something arises as you do this, pay attention. Maybe see what the texture of the feeling is. Or maybe you feel something in your heart area already. If there's a heaviness, a sorrow, something that you've been holding, just name it for a moment. Sometimes it's helpful to just experience your heart as being like a lotus, as it opens, one petal at a time in the morning sun. The delicate center of that flower is where the sweetness is, the sense of love. So this fragrance of your love, freeing it up. And just have a sense of what you might want to use right now just to practice. What feeling? Could be a thought. Breathing in. Just allow it to arise, to be in your space. Breathing it out, breathing out, just sending to this feeling a sense of love and caring. Remembering that it is so natural to be caring. And this may take some patience. Reminding yourself too that others too feel this very feeling. Whatever it is, others feel this. So many have felt it in the past. So many will feel it in the future. So many feel it now. And let this notion just open your own caring. Sometimes we practice this by visualizing the heart as being encased in it like an eggshell, where we begin to watch the crack forming from the top, traveling down the front, and revealing just this very subtle luminous blue luminosity coming from inside and shining out through that crack. So you can bring this into your practice if you like, or just simply feel your heart to be free and luminous, like the open sky. Breathing naturally. If you are practicing with the image of the eggshell, just letting it come apart, letting it just crack, this crack travel down and widen, revealing more of this luminous brightness of your own love. Till the two halves fall away altogether, you're left with this radiance of heart, warmth, brightness, spaciousness. And bringing this quality to the feeling that arose earlier. Bringing this spaciousness, this embrace of your own love to this feeling. No need to get rid of the feeling, but just hold it in your love. You can even say to this feeling, I love you and I will stay with you as long as it takes. And for this stage of the practice, because we are short on time, let us also widen the circle of this quality of love and include everyone who may feel this very feeling. Sending out the spacious open sky of your love. Thank you. I'm sure we could have gone longer, but it's a taste. It's just a taste. Thank you.